Once again, I'm delighted to welcome you to our third lesson on the theme of biblical basis for befriending foreigners. So those that are here at Bethany Theological Seminary and those who are watching by video, welcome. We're shifting now to the New Testament. Our first two lessons focused primarily on Old Testament texts. Now our theme is Jesus in need. And so we'll be looking at how Jesus is portrayed in the Gospel of Matthew. I imagine that as Jesus grew up in Galilee, he was nurtured in the scriptures of his people and the traditions of his people. And so as he read the Bible, which for him was the Old Testament, he learned about being part of a community that was identifying with foreigners, as we described in the last lesson. He would have learned empathy for foreigners as part of festivals like the one we read about. So that would be part of his scripture, but also we'll find that he was himself a refugee. So he had direct experience that would cause him to identify with refugees and with other people in need, which he clearly does in the Gospel of Matthew. So the Gospel of Matthew begins with a number of foreign connections, and I want to describe those briefly to help explain why Jesus would identify with foreigners. First of all, he has foreigners in his genealogy. We've already talked about one of them, Ruth, but also two Canaanite women, Tamar and Rahab, play a role in his genealogy. And also, one of his foremothers is described as the wife of Uriah the Hittite. That's Bathsheba. We don't know whether she was a foreigner herself, but she was married to a foreigner before David's indiscretion and murder, and so she is part of Jesus' family tree as well. It's interesting that Matthew pauses to mention foremothers, whereas the custom in many genealogies was not to mention mothers. Here Matthew makes an exception, and all of the women he mentions have some kind of foreign connections. They also have other things in common, including courage. But here is an example of a foreign connection. And then, of course, in Matthew's story, the first people to worship Jesus and honor him as King of the Jews are Magi from the East. These are probably astrologers, people who specialize in predicting the future, and they are alert to a star which will signal to them that a new king has been born. They first go to Jerusalem and then on to Bethlehem when they get word that the Messiah of the Jews was to be born in Bethlehem. Of course, they inadvertently tip off Herod to the fact that there has been a birth that he might be concerned about, and this results in Jesus' family needing to leave Bethlehem. They escape Herod's plot to kill Jesus and become refugees in Egypt. So here is an initial series of scenes in Matthew that help to show Jesus' connection to foreigners. And that will be an important development later in the story when the mission of Jesus' disciples extends to all nations. I love this portrayal of the adoration of the Magi from an Ethiopian artist. Unfortunately, we don't know the artist's name. Patrick Comerford bought it and photographed it and put it on the web. It's just eye-opening, isn't it? And wide eyes and wonder speak volumes as we look at these really adorable people honoring Jesus. The wise men bring gold, frankincense, and myrrh, which I wonder if that is the most logical gift for a new child. Maybe some diapers would be better, but actually, no, this was a resource that the family could use. I imagine that the sale of these treasures would have helped to finance their life as refugees. Let's read the story of Jesus' departure for Egypt as part of our understanding of him as a refugee. Now, after they had left an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." And Joseph got up and took the child and his mother by night and went to Egypt. The depiction of the flight to Egypt by Luc Olivier Merson is fascinating to me. Note Joseph there bundled up on the ground, the donkey resting and maybe grazing even in the desert. And then up in the arms of the Sphinx, you have a glowing Mary and the child. Just a fascinating imagination of that scene of flight. As Joseph, Mary, and the child flee, they would have had to go by the Herodium, which was one of the fortresses that Herod constructed just south of Bethlehem. This would have been a harrowing flight, I suspect, for them. And even so, Joseph obeys exactly what the angel tells him. In fact, throughout this story, you have an angel giving instructions to Joseph, and then word for word, the narrator tells us that Joseph did exactly that. His obedience is one of the reasons why God is using him, I think, to protect Jesus. So Jesus is protected by Joseph's obedience, both from a divorce that would have threatened his claim to the throne of Judah, and also protected now from the massacre that Herod has plotted. Note that Jesus is called the child throughout this passage. He's never named. I think this suggests a sense of vulnerability for Jesus. You have a portrayal of two kings, one the mighty great Herod, and the other the child, who is totally vulnerable. And yet we'll see that the child survives and the king dies. So they go to Egypt and remain there until after the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." The quotation from Hosea 11:1, "Out of Egypt I have called my son," helps to reinforce the connection between Jesus' experience as a refugee and the earlier experience of Israel's exodus from Egypt. In Hosea, "my son" is a reference to Israel being led out of slavery in Egypt. Here, that phrase is applied specifically to Jesus. He embodies the experience of his people as foreigners in Egypt. Continuing with verse 16, "When Herod saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, he was infuriated, and he sent and killed all the children in and around Bethlehem who are 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had learned from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled because they are no more." Here is another echo of Old Testament history. In fact, it's a double reference. Jeremiah 31:15, which is quoted here, refers to Ramah, a village north of Jerusalem that was a launching point for Judean families who were forced into exile in Babylon. Jeremiah pictures a voice of Rachel being heard in Ramah. Rachel was buried near Bethlehem, far to the south, but her weeping for these exiles being carried off to Babylon is so loud that it can be heard clear to the north in Ramah. She weeps for her descendants who are being led away into foreign lands. But God responds in Jeremiah's prophecy with a message of assurance that the exile will end and Rachel's children will return. For Matthew, the weeping of Rachel is for a loss that occurs in Bethlehem, very close to where Rachel is buried. Rome's puppet, King Herod, committed mass murder in order to preserve his power, which incidentally reminds me of some mass murders occurring even today as dictators try to preserve their power and have no concern for the death of their own people or the anguish of parents who lose their children. Let's continue now in verse 19. When Herod died, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who are seeking the child's life are dead." It is ironic justice that the vulnerable child survives, and Herod, who's trying simply to preserve his power, quickly dies. Then Joseph got up and took the child and his mother and went to the land of Israel. Once again, he obeys word for word what he's told to do. But when he heard that Archelaus was ruling over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And after being warned in a dream, he went away to the district of Galilee. There he made his home in a town called Nazareth, so that what had been spoken through the prophets might be fulfilled: he will be called a Nazarene. The comment I'd like to make here is that in going to Nazareth in Galilee, Jesus' family are still refugees. They're afraid of Herod's son Archelaus in Judah, and so they can't go home. So they're staying now in what for them is foreign territory of Galilee. This is a little different from Luke's account, where Jesus' family is from Nazareth and they go to Bethlehem. In Matthew's account, they're natives of Bethlehem and refugees in Nazareth. And so Jesus grows up as a refugee for essentially his entire childhood. And even you could say that he's a refugee in Galilee at the beginning of his ministry. He only goes home to Judea in his final journey, which isn't safe for him. So here is someone who knows what it is like to be a refugee. So let's now look at how Jesus is portrayed as an adult in Matthew. We can connect Jesus' experience with homelessness as well as refugee status. When Jesus saw great crowds around him, he gave orders to go to the other side, and a scribe approached and said he would go, and Jesus said to him, "Foxes have holes, and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." That's a familiar verse, and I think we need to recognize the deep irony of what it's saying. The Son of Man in Daniel 7:13 is a heavenly figure to be revealed in the end times, a powerful figure who is in Jewish literature associated with the Messiah. And it's ironic that such a powerful figure from heaven has no place on earth to call home. Foxes do, birds do, but not the Son of Man. The portrayal here of Jesus teaching a crowd is put on by a Christian community in Cameroon, a nation of West Africa. What they did was they, as a community, dramatized biblical stories. Then they had photographs taken, and then artists transformed the photographs into paintings. This is the Jesus Matha project, and we'll have several illustrations from that project in this presentation. Here's another piece of Jesus' adult ministry and teaching that connects to his identification with vulnerable people who are travelers and dependent on hospitality. He is sending out his disciples in Matthew 10. 12 disciples are going out on a mission to Israel, and he warns them that they will be persecuted, that they will have to flee those that hate them, and that they will be dependent on the hospitality of those who welcome them. So he begins, or the first verse that I'm going to quote is, "See, I am sending you out like sheep in the midst of wolves." So it is this experience of being persecuted and dependent on hospitality that connects to Jesus' promise beginning in verse 40 of chapter 10, "Whoever welcomes you welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me." If Jesus is sending out these disciples, he is identifying with them so that when they are welcomed, he's saying he himself is being welcomed. This is part of the culture of that time. When emissaries are sent out, if you welcome the emissary, that's equivalent to welcoming the one that sent them. So that's part of the culture. But I also think there's another reason for seeing that Jesus identifies with these disciples who are persecuted and who have to go from village to village. He knows what it is like to be a refugee and a traveler in need of hospitality. And so he identifies with these disciples. Whoever welcomes you welcomes me. A similar promise occurs in Matthew 18, 1-5, but here it's in relation to a child. Verse 4, I'll just read that part. Whoever becomes humble like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. Remember that in Matthew 2, Jesus is identified repeatedly as the child. This is the same word used in this passage. Now, this child is not identified as a refugee. It's a child who's part of a household in Capernaum, where Jesus is. Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, nevertheless connects us back to the earlier story where Jesus is identified with a child. And we might think of the child as being somehow echoing the theme of Jesus as a refugee. In any case, children at that time were vulnerable often. They were not the center of attention, as they many times are in our culture. They were considered to be a source of labor. Many of them worked very hard from dawn to dusk or even longer. Paul wrote in Galatians 4:1 that when the heir is still a child, he's no better off than a slave. I don't think he was exaggerating too much. Children were treated as sources of labor, and Jesus identifies with this lowly child just as he identifies with the vulnerable apostles back in chapter 10. Whoever welcomes one such child welcomes me. This theme of Jesus' identification of himself with those who are vulnerable continues in Matthew 25, verses 31-46. Here, strangers are included among the needy people that Jesus identifies with. This is a familiar passage, but let's read it again. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand, and the goats at his left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, "Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Jesus identifies with the folks who have these needs, hunger and thirst, being a stranger, which I connect with being a foreigner, and also those who are naked or need clothing, who are sick, and who are in prison. In each case, Jesus identifies with them and suggests that care for those folks is also care for him. Interestingly, the need of thirst is directly tied to the promise back in chapter 10. Whoever gives a cup of cold water to you in the name of a disciple will not lose their reward. This is, I think, a dramatization of the promise in chapter 10. Whoever welcomes you welcomes me. The righteous who hear this respond, "Well, Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these, who are members of my family, you did it to me. Then he will say to those at his left hand, you that are accursed, depart from me into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me, naked, and you did not give me clothing, sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. Then he will answer them, truly I tell you, just as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. Although this passage is called the parable of the sheep and the goats, the metaphor of a shepherd separating animals is the main feature that is like a parable. Other scholars refer to it as an apocalyptic judgment scene, not as a parable. Jesus appears in glory as the heavenly figure of the Son of Man described in Daniel 7:13. And he's accompanied by angels, presumably the same angels that separate the wheat and the tares back in Matthew 13:41. In this scene, the people from all the nations are judged based on how they have treated the least of these who are members of my family, or literally the least of these, my brothers. In the teaching that closely resembles Jesus' earlier promises to a suffering apostle and a child, here he promises entrance to all who welcome and serve the least of these. Now, who are the least of these who are members of my family? There's actually debate about that among scholars. Some think the category is limited to disciples of Jesus, since elsewhere Jesus refers to them as brothers or brothers and sisters. Some think the category includes everyone who is in need. The word least or little can refer to anyone who is lonely or vulnerable. But brothers is a word that Matthew typically uses to refer to disciples. At least the least of these brothers could then mean the most lonely and vulnerable of Jesus' disciples. Now, there are challenges involved in each of those interpretations, whether you think it refers to just disciples who are needy, or whether you think it refers to anyone in need. If it's a reference to just disciples, then these are people who go out in mission and who are in need, who find themselves hungry, sick, thirsty, in prison, strangers. And Jesus is saying, if you welcome these emissaries of mine, then you welcome me. That puts us disciples in the position of being in need, and that's challenging for us. We might prefer to be in the position of helping others who are in need. Are we willing to make the kinds of sacrifices for Jesus that would put us in the position of needing to receive the help of others? On the other hand, there is a challenge involved in interpreting it to refer to all people in need. It means that we then become part of the solution to the world's problems of hunger, thirst, and alienation, being stranger, imprisonment. This is a challenge then to reach out and care for others. And this is how many of us have heard the text in the last couple of centuries as a call to reach out in service to the least of these, to anyone, and then in doing so, then we are serving Jesus. It's interesting to compare this story in Matthew, the final judgment, with a text from Islamic writings. There is a passage in the Hadith literature that sounds an awful lot like Matthew 25:31-46. And so I'd like to read that with you again as well today. This passage from Islamic literature is not part of the Quran. The Hadith literature was a record of oral traditions that were attributed to the Prophet Muhammad. So these are teachings that people recorded as having come orally from Muhammad, not in the Quran, but through other channels, by word of mouth. So listen to how this passage compares with Matthew's account, paying attention to some of the similarities and differences. Abu Hurairah reported Allah's messenger, may peace be upon him, as saying, Allah's messenger is the Prophet Muhammad. Verily, Allah, the exalted and glorious, would say on the day of resurrection, O son of Adam, I was sick, but you did not visit me. He would say, O my Lord, how could I visit thee, whereas thou art the Lord of the worlds? Thereupon he would say, didn't you know that such and such servant of mine was sick, but you did not visit him? And were you not aware of this, that if you had visited him, you would have found me by him? O son of Adam, I asked food from you, but you did not feed me. He would say, my Lord, how could I feed thee, whereas thou art the Lord of the worlds? He said, didn't you know that such and such servant of mine asks food from you, but you did not feed him? And were you not aware that if you had fed him, you would have found him by my side? The Lord would again say, O son of Adam, I asked drink from you, but you did not provide me. He would say, my Lord, how could I provide thee, whereas thou art the Lord of the worlds? Whereupon he would say, such and such a servant of mine asked you for a drink, but you did not provide him. And had you provided him drink, you would have found him near me. So in this teaching, the prophet Muhammad reports on a conversation that he will have with God. And of course, the Arabic word for God is Allah. So this is a reference to God. God makes three complaints in this future conversation on the day of resurrection. Muhammad did not care for God in situations of sickness, hunger, and thirst. And each time Muhammad asks how he could visit or provide for a God who is transcendent, who is the Lord of the worlds. Each time God responds that Muhammad needed to care for the servants of God, those who were sick or hungry or thirsty. And if he had done so, he would have experienced God's presence along with the person in need. The idea that serving people is how one serves God is very similar in this passage as we saw in Matthew. So in Islamic tradition, this story helps to teach charity, which is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. It's a very important value for Islam. Now, I don't know how you feel about Islam, but I do think it's helpful to lift up passages that have ties or show similar values to the ones that we have learned as Christians. Here is a graphic from the UN High Commissioner of Refugees that shows the top 6 countries hosting refugees in the world today. As we've said, there are huge numbers of refugees in the world. Where are they? Who is hosting them? Here's your answer. Turkey hosts 2.5 million as of 2015. Pakistan, 1.6 million. Lebanon, 1.1 million. Iran, almost 1 million. Ethiopia, about 750,000. And Jordan, about 2/3 That's a lot of people to have in your country, small countries typically, with limited resources, and yet a huge need for people to stay as they flee neighboring countries like Syria, Afghanistan, or Somalia. Actually, all 6 of these top refugee host countries are next door to another country where there's severe conflict causing refugees. And certainly that's a factor in these high numbers. But I would like to suggest that another factor may be involved. After all, these countries could close their borders. They could say, you may not pass from Iraq or from Afghanistan or from Somalia. Stay where you are. You can't come here. But they're not saying that. They're welcoming people into camps in those countries. Could it be that one of the motives for that kind of welcome is the teaching of Islam? After all, 5 out of 6 of these countries are majority Muslim. And I suspect that if we asked them why they are welcoming refugees, they would say, it's our responsibility as followers of Islam to practice charity toward those in need. So I will just offer that as a suggestion that maybe that's one of the reasons why so many refugees are hosted now in these countries. Here's a picture of one of them. This is a boy from Syria. I'm not sure where he is exactly, but he's getting a drink of cold water. Whoever gives one of these little ones a drink of water in my name will not lose his reward. I think that when I, at least, look at this boy from Syria, I see echoes of Jesus' story, Jesus the refugee. Do you see Jesus in his face? I invite you to do that. I hope that what we have learned in this lesson is that what Jesus thinks about refugees is really important. And Jesus identifies as a refugee with other refugees and with people who are in need. Whatever you do to one of these least of these, you do to me. Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. And that's our key verse from Matthew 18:5. So here are some questions for reflection and discussion. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus clearly identifies with vulnerable people, including children. How does that connection help to shape your practice as a follower or disciple of Jesus? And when have you experienced Jesus' presence while helping another person or while receiving help from someone else? Was there a time when you were engaged in helping or being helped where you were especially aware that Jesus was there with you, that in fact you were welcoming Jesus or being welcomed as an emissary of Jesus? So I invite you to reflect on those questions, whether here at Bethany Theological Seminary or in your groups where you may be viewing this video. Think about this and talk about it.